Some states require 2 license plates installed on a vehicle, one in the front and one in the rear. Other states require that only 1 license plate is installed on the rear. In states that require 2 license plates, some residents do not install both the front and the rear license plates. Connecticut and New York require that 2 license plates be installed on a vehicle. A random sample from the 2 states was collected, and below is the data. Use the 5% significance level to test the claim that Connecticut and New York have the same proportion of vehicles with rear license plates only. Okay, so we have quite a lot of calculations to list. So we will find out what the number in the first sample is. We'll call the first sample Connecticut. There are 2,049 items in that sample. Then the probability of success, that will be getting a car that has the rear license plate only, is 239 out of those 2,049. And then the probability of failure is the other 1,810 out of 2,049. Okay, then we do the same thing for New York. The total number here is 560. The probability of success, that would be getting a vehicle with a rear license plate only, is 19 out of those 560. And then the probability of failure will be the other 541 out of 560. So the next thing we have to do is determine the claim. Right? So we are asked to use the 5% significant level to test the claim that they have the same proportion of vehicles. Okay, so the claim, we're going to say the proportion of Connecticut is equal to the proportion in New York. And remember, we could write this as the proportion of Connecticut minus the proportion of New York is equal to 0. Now this claim contains equality. So when it contains equality, the claim is the null hypothesis. Then the alternative hypothesis will take the opposing view that the proportion of Connecticut minus the proportion of New York does not equal 0. We can state the level of significance for the test. We were told to test at the 5% significance level. This will be a two-tailed test. We get this from the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis does not equal 0, and that will tell us that we have a two-tailed test. Now we need to determine the sampling distribution. To do that, we'll check the conditions. We have independent random samples, and then we had to check all of these conditions, and since these are greater than or equal to 10, the conditions for using the 2 proportion Z test are satisfied. So with that being said, we could label our critical value for the rejection regions. It's a two-tailed test. Testing at the 5% significance level means 0.025 in this tail and 0.025 in this tail. These correspond to critical values of plus or minus 1.96. Okay. Now we're going to find the test statistic. Now to find the test statistic, we are going to have to use, we'll have to calculate this value P sub C, which is x1 plus x2 over n1 plus n2. Remember, the x1 is n1 p1, and the x2 is n2 p2. So n1 p1 is 239. Then we'll add that to n2 p2, which is 19. And then we divide by the total number in the samples. For n1, there were 2,049, and for n2, there were 560 in the sample. So when you add these together, we get 258 out of 2,609, which reduces to 0.0988. And after we round all of this, it will be 0.1. We'll use that for simplicity. So if we put that value on the, well, we'll use that value in the next calculation. So to calculate z, we have to take P1. Now, that was the 239 out of 2049. So let's just use the decimal approximation, 0.1166. And we will use the decimal approximation for P hat 2 as well, which is 0.0339. After that, we need to subtract off P1 minus P2. That is what we expect, and we've assumed those to be equal to 0. Then we can fill in the bottom. So we'll be taking the square root of PC, which we've set as 0.1, times 1 minus PC, which would be 0.9, and we divide that by 1 over N1, which is 1 over, this is the blue, 1 over 2049, plus 1 over N2, which was 560. Okay, so be careful how you put this in your calculator. On the numerator, we'll get 0.0827, and in the denominator, we should get 0.0143. And when we do this division, we should get a test statistic that is 5.78. This is a very big test statistic. And if we put that on the diagram, it is very clearly in the rejection region, 5.78. Remember, we'd also have to calculate the p-value, we need both ends, the probability here. And then by symmetry, this is negative 0.578, and we'd be calculating this probability as well. Okay, so however we do this p-value, the p-value will be 2 times, you can do it either way, the probability that z is less than the negative value, negative 5.78, which is equal to, you could do it the other way and take it 2 times the probability that z was greater than the positive 5.78. Either way, when you do this, you'll get 2 times the number that comes up is effectively 0. So we will say the probability associated with this is just 0. And now we can circle our conclusions. We were in the rejection region. We will reject h sub 0. We can do that based on the p-value method that 0 is less than alpha, which was 5%, or we could do it because the test statistic, 5.78, is greater than 1.96, which is the critical value. The key thing is here is that we were inside the rejection region. And that will allow us to make the formal conclusion. At the 5% significance level, there is not enough evidence to support the claim. Now remember, we are rejecting h sub 0, and h sub 0 was the claim. So there is not enough evidence to support the claim that Connecticut and New York have the same proportion of cars with rear license plates only. Now we could also look at the confidence interval with this. Let's construct the 95% confidence level. I've just recopied the information that we would need here. To do this, we'd go to our stats, the tests in the 2 proportion z interval. You'll be inputting stats at a confidence level of 95%. And when you do this, you should come up with 0.0622 will be less than P1 minus P2 will be less than 0.1032. So what does that confidence interval suggest about the claim that Connecticut and New York have the same proportion of vehicles with rear license plates only? Well, the claim was P1 minus P2 is equal to 0. We rejected this, and we can see that 0 is not in that interval, and therefore there is not sufficient evidence to support the claim that Connecticut and New York have the same proportion of vehicles with rear license plates only.